don't stop until you are past the hazard area.
Every week, more than 3 million Canadians know more about what they're watching by reading TV Guide magazine. Next week's issue on sale now.
Alone at last.
But Phil, look.
Huh? Oh, that. Doris, I need the blimp behind me because...
Three's a crowd, Phil.
Phil may not care about all the tire testing we do at Goodyear. All he knows is Goodyear stands for the best.
Doris will go a long way with the blimp behind us.
Come up to Goodyear when you buy tires and get the blimp behind you.
I should have married Stanley. He just has a dog.
Coming up next, Webster.
Good morning. I'm on the horns of a dilemma this morning. I made somewhat of a rash promise yesterday to explain why the bells are ringing, to explain in detail, and give you a firm opinion. I'll do my best when I talk this morning about the Energy Security Bill C-94, which is the basic cause of the paralysis of Canada through the paralysis of the House of Commons. Now, to talk about that from a Tory point of view this morning, and they're on the prod, really on the prowl, is it yet another Conservative MP. And his name is Benno Friesen from Surrey-White Rock North Delta. On the program this morning, too, we're going to have a very sad story about a woman, Mrs. Pat Wright, whose 13-year-old daughter, Anne, died tragically and in the overall totally unnecessary fashion in a highway accident in 1980. And Pat wants to be able to tell you what she thinks about the effects of the system of justice in this particular case. And with her too is a man I've wanted to talk to for quite some time. He's Dr. Roger Tonkin, an expert, Department of Pediatrics, UBC, etc., all the rest of it, and involved with a committee of concerned citizens who are on what some people might think is a reactionary move, but I happen to think is a good move to up the driving age from 16 to 18 to prevent the slaughter of adolescents on the highway. But first, Energy Security Bill C-94 after the break. The Energy Security Bill C-94 is an omnibus bill. Now first let me explain to you what an omnibus bill is. It's a device commonly, not too commonly, used by parliaments to include a number of acts and statutes in the one bill. It's more commonly used as a kind of wrap-up of odds and ends, both provincially and federally. For instance, if you want to amend a number of minor amendments and acts and change the criminal code a little bit here and there, you put in an omnibus bill. It goes to the House of Commons, it's dealt with in the routine manner, and people generally at the end of a session vote for the omnibus bill to give the government the necessary powers to carry out the intent of its legislation. This is a different omnibus bill. This is the Energy Security Bill C-94, and the purpose of it, and there's no doubt about the purpose, is to ratify the very complex agreements between Ottawa and the Western provinces to implement the national energy policy. Now, this energy bill includes not merely amendments to acts, not merely cleaning up bits and pieces, but it includes, in fact, 4 new major acts. One of these 4 acts is the Petroleum Incentive Programs, PIP. We'd give you the PIP. And in this act is the power for the government to subsidize up to 80% of exploration costs, you might say, by the oil industry, Canadian and non-Canadian. That involves a sum of money of around $5.5 billion. It's a big act. It's a tax act. Then comes Canadian Ownership and Control Determination Act. This is the Nationalization Act. The Minister of Energy, Lalonde, will have the power to determine the rate of takeover by Canadians of foreign, principally American, oil companies. Now, I'm not quite sure if this includes the really contentious section which says that foreign shareholders can be denied their rights as to the value of their shares on an authorized takeover by the Canadian government. But this particular Ownership and Control Determination Act also makes amendments to FIRA, the Foreign Investment Review Act, for the purpose of controlling foreign investments. What can be done, what can't be done. And then there's an Energy Monitoring Act, which seems more routine to me, and that gives the government power to obtain any information it wants on any energy use and cooperation. Then there's a host of amendments. Now, some of these amendments are necessary and proper and routine. Fuel Consumption Standards Act. That's about mandatory standards for automobiles, gas consumption, and voluntary consumption restraints. Then there's the Energy Administration Act, which ain't quite so simple. The Energy Administration Act has got major amendments to taxing powers. That's a tax bill. Then there's the National Energy Board Act, which, among other things, controls export prices of oil and gas. And I think it's the one which also controls a fuel subsidization program. One of them does anyway. And then it goes on, the Oil Substitution and Conservation Act, conservation programs, etc. Now, let me try and make it clear what the apparent danger of this omnibus bill is. First, from the government point of view, the National Energy Program is introduced. The National Energy Program is backed up with a budget. The National Energy Program is the whole keystone to the liberal energy policy, with the upward sliding of prices, including the 28 cents in this particular set of acts and amendments. And it's essential for the Liberal government to maintain their revenues, to have this act passed so that they can tax us in a retroactive fashion wherever is necessary. We're already being taxed without the authority of law, technically without the authority of law. So you can see it's a very major thing. What's wrong with it? Well, in the House of Commons, when a bill comes in, it goes through a couple of readings, then it goes to committee. And at the committee, in the committee stage, you can call in all kinds of experts, cross-examine them, whether you're a government member or an NDP member or a Tory member. And you're considering normally one bill. In this one, you're not considering one bill. You're considering 4 major new acts and a whole bunch of amendments, some of which contain very strong taxing powers and interference with the corporate ownership of various concerns. Now, is this bad? Well, it could be disastrous for the future of sane legislation in this country. And I have an authority on this. Go back to 1971, when the Speaker was the Honourable Lucien Lamoureux. And he was being asked about the dangers of omnibus bills. And to the answer to that question, he said, now listen closely. I believe the honourable member for such and such said that we might reach the point where we would have only one bill at the start of the session for the improvement of the quality of life in Canada, which would include every single proposed piece of legislation for the session. And, said Lamoureux in 71, that would be an omnibus bill with a capital O and a capital B. But would it be acceptable legislation? There must be a point, said Lamoureux, a well-respected speaker, there must be a point where we go beyond what is acceptable from a strictly parliamentary standpoint. Get the picture. Somewhere down the road, a government is elected. Doesn't matter what shade it is. A government is freely elected. And it brings in a speech from the throne. And the speech from the throne outlines the government's plans. Okay, in this particular case, to be ridiculous, the plans are, one, to nationalize all bicycles, to supply free drugs to everybody under the age of 18, to turn all men into women. Because as you know, Parliament in our kind of system has the power, with a majority, to do almost anything it wants under legislation. So you could have one speech from the throne. The government says, it's our intention to do this, that, such and so, and we're going to cover that legislation with an omnibus bill. And they could put in 20 acts changing the whole course of human destiny, and providing they have a majority, they could restrict with closure the discussion and pass it. One bill to run the country. Now that's putting it to the extreme case, but it is possible. Now I hate to quote the Globe and Mail, but they did get opinions from Dr. Eugene Forcey, who's an ex-NDPer and now a retired Liberal senator. And he says, with great clarity, explaining that it's a taxing bill, highly novel way of doing things, unknown in our law hitherto, this particular dimension of authority in one bill, it could establish a very dangerous precedent. The bill raises issues of great importance, issues which reasonable persons might well consider should justify obstruction. Forcey is saying that some reasonable people can look at this omnibus bill and say, now is the time when a truly loyal subject of the chief magistrate will neither advise nor consent to arbitrary measures. Now, is it an arbitrary measure? Is the freedom of speech of the members of the House of Commons legitimately obstructed at the moment? Political views, you'll hear them again and again and again until the bells stop ringing. We don't know what's going to happen when the bell stops ringing. From a Liberal point of view, it can be said. They've made their program clear. It's been discussed in the country from coast to coast at some levels since McKechnie brought in his budget and Lalonde brought in the national energy policy. The Tories looking for political advantage and perhaps trying to solidify their party behind a permanent leader, for the moment anyway, Joe Clark, have decided to use a gimmick. Now, their gimmick, they didn't walk out in the course of this bill. They walked out in a motion to adjourn, and they're counting on embarrassing the Liberals beyond belief, counting on embarrassing the Speaker, Madame Sauvé, who has the power, or she is not prescribed from using the power to stop the bells, call the vote, and if the Tories don't turn up, the hell with them. Where do I stand on it? The Liberals are in many areas wrong and arrogant. They've got to submit. And there are arguments that they've offered it and the Tories deny that they've offered it. But at some stage, the government is going to have to give, I suspect, to break it into 2 or 3 major bills and deal with it in committee properly. And the Tories are going to have to come up with a reasonable limit for closure. So I see a plague on both their houses, but it could lead to disaster in democracy in this country if it's not squared up within the next couple of weeks. So I haven't really given you an opinion. Well, maybe I shouldn't. A plague on both their houses, and let's hope that common sense prevails. Next, Benno Friesen.
All those in favor of the motion, please say yea. Yea! All those against the motion, please say nay. Nay! In my opinion, the nays have it. Call in the members.
Benno Friesen is a Conservative MP for Surrey-White Rock North Delta. Now, what I said yesterday was that you're using a gimmick on your motion to adjourn. Whether or not you're totally justified, I'm not quite yet sure. But is it your intention to bring down the government on this issue?
Well, first of all, you can't bring it down. They have the votes, and they vote in blocks, and they will always support Mr. Trudeau. They vote en masse, and they won't break. They know that if they went to the people now, that they would lose. The second point I'd like to make is that we're really not stopping Parliament. All we're stopping is this particular piece of legislation. 3 weeks ago, you know, when they heard that we had the votes to defeat them in a non-confidence motion, they moved in a hurry and they changed the agenda. The next day, that business of an opposition day was changed, and we were debating legislation. They can change that agenda anytime they want.
Okay, let me get back to that, though. What was the particular, on an opposition day, you had counted heads and discovered that there had too many out of the country, and you could beat them?
That's right.
Could you beat them with or without the NDP?
Yes, we felt that we could beat them without the NDP, but we thought that the NDP would vote with us, even though they wouldn't be there in mass.
Oh, therefore. So on that particular occasion, the government scented Nielsen's plans.
That's right. As I understand it, one of Ed Broadbent's office people went over to the Liberals and told them what was up.
They told tales on you.
That's right.
So instead of the opposition day coming the next day where you could have slapped in a quick non-confidence vote, the Liberal whip or the Liberal caucus changed the
agenda.
Orders of the day.
That's right. Changed the order of the day. We were debating legislation instead of an opposition motion, and there was no vote, and the government naturally stayed in power. Now, if they could do it 3 weeks ago, when they thought they would be defeated on a non-confidence motion, why can't they do it today? They can change that agenda anytime they want.
In other words, Trudeau could come into the House today, having told the Speaker that they're going to change the orders of the day, revert to any other piece of business, the bells would stop, and you would be in the House.
That's right. Exactly.
Now, but what about the bill itself? I didn't go into all the nuances of C-94, but it does put many of your people and many politicians in a very tricky position of one vote on all these aspects,
right,
to some of which you object to the death.
Exactly.
Give me an example.
Well, for example, probably a lot of Canadians would want to see the tax legalized. They've been collecting it for over a year now, 28 cents a gallon. That ought to be legitimized by legislation. And so we would vote for it, just to legalize it. Now, you can imagine how John Crosby would feel about voting for that. He might want to vote against it. At the same time, there's a section in there that allows for the federal government to expropriate land for a corridor through Quebec to put hydro lines from Labrador to the United States so that Newfoundland can sell its energy directly to the United States. Now, you can imagine that the people in Newfoundland want that passed, but the people in Quebec would be very loath to see that happen because they would lose revenue. If Newfoundland can sell it directly to the United States, they're going to lose revenue as a result of it. Now, that's going to be a split vote. The Quebec caucus in the Liberal Party is not going to want to vote for that, but the Newfoundland caucus will want to vote for it. Now, it's a whole strategy of divide and conquer. So you put objectionable pieces together with pieces that are quite attractive.
And the nasty bits with the nice bits.
Exactly.
The baddie and the goodie.
Sure. Politically, it's good strategy.
Okay, in an omnibus bill, when it comes to the House of Commons, just give me the stages, please.
Okay.
First reading.
Yeah, it's first of all, he drafted draft legislation and gave it to the opposition parties and said, take a look at this. Harvey Andre looked at it and he said, look, this is going to cause trouble for us. And on December the 21st, he wrote to Lalonde and said, look, we cannot accept this legislation. If you're going to table it this way, you're going to have problems. We can't accept it. That was on December 21. On January the 14th, Lalonde wrote back and said, tough.
But Lalonde said, I'm prepared to split it into sections if you'll give me the closure.
I've got his letter here, and
I'd like to see that letter because it would seem to me that somebody's misleading the public, as in between Andre and Lalonde.
That's right. If I can find it among my sheaf of materials, I've got it here somewhere, and I'll have it to you.
Never mind. Carry on with it.
The other, here it is.
You're now looking at Lalonde's letter.
Right.
Andre wrote to Lalonde and said, split it up.
Yes.
Not acceptable.
Right. And Lalonde wrote back and said,
I cannot agree with your first suggestion to divide the energy security bill into a multitude of bills, proceeding with some parts at different times in different forums.
Does that sound like he offered to split it?
That sounds like he didn't want it to go to individual committee stages.
That's
Is that
right.
correct?
Right. He wanted it as committee the whole.
To divide the proposed bill into various parts would serve only to confuse and frustrate Parliament. Unnecessary delay for energy security. Your man Wilson, however, and he quotes him, says that to spread it among 5 different forums would be bad.
Oh, no, he misquoted, and I've got the document there too. In the House of Commons, Wilson asked for a separate special committee to be established and examine the whole national energy program. Now Mr. Lalonde takes that out of context and says, okay, now Mr. Wilson agrees with me. Well, Lalonde, you know, Crombie said of Lalonde, he could pick a fight on his way to church. And he has the technique of doing it.
He's a tough guy, Lalonde,
yes,
is he not?
He's about as warm as an iceberg.
As it stands now, therefore, Andre and Lalonde contradict each other on what they said to each other.
And we've got the documents here to prove.
This is the correct letter.
That's right. That's the photostat.
And having done that, the bill has now been through how many readings?
It's now been introduced, ready to debate, second reading.
Debate, second reading.
Right.
That's in the House.
That's in the House. And,
then it goes to?
Then it goes to Committee of the Whole. That's what they want, is Committee of the Whole, where everybody sits in the House of Commons as one large committee. And the important factor there, you see, is that witnesses can't appear. Now, Quebec has a legitimate point of view to express. They're not allowed on the floor of the House of Commons. That means they can't even be heard. Now, a fundamental principle of justice in our country is that even if you think your man is guilty, he has a right to be heard.
You're saying Quebec cannot appear in the House of Commons.
That's
no
right.
witnesses from the Quebec government.
That's
or
right.
No experts from the Quebec government would be allowed to appear to testify and be questioned
Exactly.
as in the normal manner.
That's right.
By a committee of the House of Commons.
Right. If they came to the standing committee, they could appear.
Let me get this quite clear.
Right.
It's now at the second reading stage.
Right.
It next goes to the Committee of the House of Commons as a whole.
Right.
In that committee stage, you sit in the House
That's
as
right.
a committee.
Right.
Are any witnesses called?
No.
No.
Just one or two departmental officials will sit there beside the minister.
Sit beside the ministers.
Right.
Deputy ministers will sit beside the ministers and prompt them.
Exactly.
In the normal committee stage of a bill, it would be referred to a committee outside the actual hall of the House of Commons.
That's right.
And you could sit, if you're on one of these committees, and call witnesses.
Exactly.
And ask them questions.
Right. Experts from the industry, from the provinces, anybody could come.
So you're saying that the omnibus bill with a capital O and a capital B denies a proper examination of any aspect
Right.
of the 4 major acts and the handful of amendments.
Secondly, if we meet as a committee of the whole, we lose one stage of the proceedings. If it goes to a committee of the House, then you submit amendments. Then when it comes back to the report stage of the House, you can submit amendments again. If it goes to the Committee of the Whole, you lose that report stage and you can't submit those amendments in the House of Commons.
All right. Now, has Lalonde asked for I'm sure Lalonde said, you know, just going from my own knowledge,
yes.
To break it into pieces if you would give the proper quick closure.
Yeah, right.
Jack Austin said that the government wants to see this passed within the next 2 to 3 weeks. 3 weeks.
Yeah, right.
Is that possible?
Well, it's not, no, it isn't. Not if you're going to have proper examination. I mean, you have 15 different measures here involving at least 8 principles. How can you do that in the time that Jack Austin says we ought to do it? If you're going to give it decent examination.
Of course, this is manna from heaven for the Conservative Party, is it not?
Yeah, we won't turn it down.
It is manna from heaven?
Yes, it is.
Why is it manna from heaven?
Because there is a feeling abroad in the country that Mr. Trudeau is abrogating to himself more and more power. And finally, we have an issue that people understand, that they feel very strongly about, and they are saying, put the blocks to him, stop him any way you can.
Do you really think the public understands?
I don't know if they understand it
Do you
fully.
really think the public cares?
I think they care.
Don't you think most people will say that crafty, tough guy Nielsen has seen the opportunity to solidify Joe's leadership right through the January review?
We had a meeting of 150 people last night in Surrey. The question didn't even come up.
Well, that's a win for Joe, isn't it?
That's right.
It means the knives must be out of his back for the moment. Is that correct?
The question doesn't even come up in caucus.
Okay. It's your turn, callers. Does this make any sense to you? Or is it just the usual disgust we have with our members of the House of Commons and their inability to behave with each other in a sane and reasonable manner? Tell Benno Friesen after the break. Simple question to Benno Friesen, simple man, a simple Tory
That's
MP.
right. A simple mind.
The Speaker's proposition was rejected yesterday. It wasn't a proposition. She got them together and said, I'm not trying to mediate, but what's going to happen? Nothing came of it.
That's right.
Is the Speaker held not in the best of regard by the Conservatives?
Well, the Speaker's decision is really not the issue in this particular piece. There are
It would be if she stopped the bells and called the vote.
Yes. Oh, yes.
What
yeah.
would happen then?
Oh, then I think it would be a matter of whether we had confidence in her judgment. But right now, that is not the issue. The issue is how much we are going to allow the Prime Minister to bulldoze through Parliament pieces of legislation that are unattractive, that are harmful, that are dangerous, and that people don't want, by putting it together with it really is a kind of parliamentary dictatorship.
How can you say that the legislation itself is what the people want because it's been brought in by their majority government?
Oh, yeah, sure. When has he ever campaigned on an issue and then carried on his administration on the basis of his campaign? He really doesn't have a mandate for this. He campaigned on 18 cents and some kind of energy security. Did he campaign on the Quebec hydro issue? He campaigned on 18 cents and gave us 28.
He certainly told us that he was going to give 25% of all filings to Petro-Canada. He certainly told there were going to be incentive grants of $5.5 billion to the oil companies, and you want to vote and pass that right now, don't you?
Well, we want to debate that. We will.
But you'll pass it.
In the end, we will pass Canadianization. We have some disagreement on how the grants ought to operate, but let me point out that the 28 cents that we're going to legitimize now can go up to 60 cents without any further parliamentary approval.
I thought it was $1.60.
Well, that'll be the total, I think.
He can increase it by 60 cents by order in council.
Yeah, another 60 cents, yes.
What's this business about the use of order in council? We get so used to orders in council in this country.
That's the convenient way for the government to pass laws without having to go to Parliament. He's passed 3,500 in 1981.
But they're all backed by the authority of a statute.
Oh, yes, they are. And many times they're amendments of statutes, but they don't have any parliamentary debate. In fact, most people don't even know they're passed because all they do is put them in the Canada Gazette. How many people read the Canada Gazette?
What have you got to say to Benno Friesen this morning, caller?
Well, one point Mr. Friesen made was that if the House sits as a committee of the whole, they cannot call witnesses. I think that is not correct. If the House sits as a committee of the whole, committee rules prevail. There's precedent for this. It's happened in provincial legislatures quite often, specifically in Alberta on the Hutterite question. Mr. Davies, a lawyer representing the Hutterites, was permitted to speak in the House.
I don't remember it happening in BC legislature.
Parliamentary rules prevail when they sit as a committee of the whole.
I have never seen it happen. I've been there 7.5 years. I've never seen it happen in Ottawa, and I don't know that anybody has ever mentioned that it happens. I think it's against the rules in Ottawa.
Okay, sir, any other point?
No, I'm sure that Mr. Friesen's wrong. Committee rules prevail. That's the only difference between the House sitting
Are you
in
sure you're right?
and as
I'm
a
quite sure I'm
committee.
right.
I'll check it out. Go ahead from Enderby. Go ahead, please.
Yes, Jack, I would like to tell Mr. Friesen that I was a Liberal for 42 years, and 8 years ago I decided that my leader was a nincompoop.
But you
changed.
You just don't like Trudeau. You're not affected.
No. I think it's the absolute opposite. I do like the man, but he is leading this country to disaster. And I'd like to ask Mr. Friesen, would he kindly, besides doing what they're doing now, bring in capital punishment?
Okay, leave capital punishment alone. We're not on capital punishment, except for Trudeau and Clark, if and as and when necessary. Go ahead, please. Go ahead.
Hello?
That's you.
Hello?
Come on.
Friesen?
Yes?
Well, I'd like to say how disgusted I am with the parliamentary procedure at the moment, the Conservative Party in particular, and I see no reason why the Speaker could not have resolved this on the first day.
They are. Benno, he's against you.
That's something that you might want to discuss with Madam Speaker, but I'm not going to discuss her prerogatives or her judgments at this point. I don't think that's the issue. The bill is the issue.
Give me short opinions, please. I want to try and get a feeling. Go ahead, please.
Hello?
That's you.
Is this me?
Yep.
Yes.
Carry on. Come on.
Hello?
Yes.
Well, I'd just like to ask Mr. Friesen what he feels the effect will have on the relationships of the two founding nations in this country.
Good question.
Well, right now, there's again, the strategy is to divide and conquer, and right now the Quebec bloc is voting as a bloc. They're standing behind the leader, whereas the Ontario bloc within the Liberal Party are again saying, no, I don't think we can have the Speaker come in and pass a separate judgment.
Are you suggesting that the Liberal whip might not be able to deliver a majority vote on this bill?
I think that the Liberal whip will be forced to withdraw what the Quebec caucus wants to do.
Well, why not get back into the House and embarrass them on that?
Well, I don't know. I'm not a very good Liberal, so I can't pass judgment.
No, but as a
on
good Tory, if you think there's a possibility of a split in the Quebec caucus,
Yes.
shouldn't you be in the House rubbing
I see what
salt
you-
in
no.
the wounds?
No, I think that the issue is bigger than that.
Go ahead, please.
Because if we come back in the House, then we debate this bill.
Go ahead, please.
Mr. Friesen.
Yes.
Sir, 2 centuries behind the Americans, this is the closest we'll ever come to having our own form of a liberty bell that we can all stand behind, proud of as freedom-loving Canadians.
Thank you, sir.
It's one bill, one vote, no taxation without representation. Really, it's what we're on to.
Go ahead, please. Hello.
Yes, hello, Jack.
Right.
Ben Friesen made a statement there at the beginning when he said the Liberals vote en bloc for everything. Now, can he name me any other party that doesn't vote en bloc when a vote comes up into the House?
Oh, sure. We voted. We split on an issue regarding banking several weeks ago. In fact, I broke with my party on an amendment that was put forward by the NDP of all people. I voted that way. In fact, about 10 of my colleagues voted with me.
How did you do that vote? Were you in the House, or did you just ignore going in?
Oh yes, we voted. We voted the way we do on every vote, and I stood.
Will it show up unanswered?
Pardon?
Will it show up unanswered that you voted against it?
Oh yes.
Go ahead from Dawson Creek.
Hello.
Yes, sir.
Jack.
Yes.
Is Ben there? Can we speak to Ben Friesen, please?
Well, of course he's here. Do ask a question.
Now, I want to know why the Conservatives now trying to hijack Parliament. We've got an elected government, and they're using these tactics to stop the elected government from governing. What can stop another opposition doing the same thing?
We're not stopping them, first of all. They can bring over another piece of legislation, and we can debate that at any time they want. We're not stopping the government. That's a line that they're putting out. All we're doing is saying, okay, if you want to debate this bill, we'll debate it, but we'll debate it on the separate issues that are in the bill, and we can't debate it properly. We can't provide a proper debate and a proper vote if it comes in a block. We will debate any piece separately, but we can't do it in one.
But you're not serious when you say you're not blocking the government. Of course you're blocking the government.
Of course not.
You've stopped the House of Commons.
Oh, sure, only because they will not change the agenda. They can come in with another piece this afternoon.
If they do your bidding, you'll go back to the House.
That's right.
If they don't do your bidding, you'll block Parliament.
Well, no, we won't. They can come with another piece of legislation.
They've been elected by the majority.
It's up to them to decide whether or not they want to have the House sit. We can't call the Parliament in.
I've been a supporter of the Conservative Party for years, and I think you've lost my vote.
Okay.
Okay, you're against him. One more short segment with Benno Friesen after the break.
We're trying to prevent the Liberal Party and Trudeau from hijacking Parliament and converting it into some kind of personal preserve of the Liberal Party. Parliament, in our view, belongs to the people of Canada, not the Liberal Party.
Perhaps in this segment, Benno Friesen, Tory MP, we should try and get some quick responses on whether or not they're for or against the Tory tactics.
That's good.
I won't rush you too quickly, callers, but I'd like you to restrict what you have to tell me briefly as to whether you're for or against the Clark-Nielsen tactics to bring down the Liberal government.
Well, that's a little overstated.
That's your intent. It's your long-range intent.
Long range, naturally, that's what an opposition is about.
Okay, what do you think, caller? Hello, caller. Come on. Go ahead, caller. That's you.
Hello?
Yes, sir.
Yes?
Uh-huh.
Okay.
Speak up. They're not very bright this morning, are they, the callers? Are you there?
I have to say that I'd like to agree with Mr. Friesen.
Good.
Because I think it's horrible that it has to be done, but there's no way we can stop Trudeau this way.
You don't think you can stop him?
There aren't many other alternatives.
Go ahead. What do you think? Hello? Are you there? Do speak up. Didn't you hear me say to you, go ahead? Okay, here you are. Just a minute.
I'm with them on that.
You're with them.
But there's one thing I'd like to get straight.
Right. Go ahead.
Hello?
Go ahead. We're getting telephone problems this morning.
Yeah, we sure do.
Try you. Go ahead, please. No, there's something wrong with the line feed.
Line's on here.
Are you there? Hello there.
Hello.
How are you?
Yes.
Okay, give me your opinion.
Okay, I'd like to say I'm all for them if they set the precedent for an omnibus bill, as long as later they don't do it for just individuals. There's good precedent as far as I'm concerned.
Okay, boy, go ahead, please.
I would like to make 2 points, if I may, Jack.
Yes.
First, you painted the worst possible scenario of an omnibus bill.
Uh-huh.
I would like to paint the worst possible scenario if a minority opposition can do this in every parliament, in every province, in the federal government, every time they do not like the legislation
Right.
in by a properly elected government. Can they do it every second week?
That's a fair question. That's an absolutely fair question. I would ask, how many times have we done it? Obviously, we have not been using this tactic indiscriminately or irresponsibly. We now feel that we have a national issue regarding the future of the country, and that's why we're using it.
But you have opened a can of worms.
Oh, but so is Mr. Trudeau in introducing this tactic.
All right, may I bring up my second point?
Sure.
How did we get this tradition when our parliament is based on the British House, when in England no such loophole exists? And if the bells ring, they only do it for 8 minutes and then they vote.
Because the British have a sense of honor that Mr. Trudeau doesn't have. They wouldn't bring about this kind of legislation. And for example, on the matter of orders in council, we have 3,500 a year. They have 10, and those 10 are brought before Parliament to be debated. And it's quite a different sense of honor that they have than that our Prime Minister has.
You're talking about these dreadful British.
I know it.
Go ahead, please.
Hello?
That's you.
I'm on.
Yep.
Mr. Friesen.
Yes.
I'm a Conservative Party member, and quite frankly, I'll tell you, I've been waffling on this thing a little bit. I didn't know which was the worst evil, what the Conservatives are doing in the Parliament or what the Liberals are doing trying to pass that bill. But I've come to the conclusion that what you're doing is the lesser of two evils. Really, I think you've got to go through with it. But I do have one question. Are you there?
Yes. Right.
Okay, my question is there any concern that the Liberals might try to do an Indira on you?
What's that?
Oh.
To
imprison the opposition.
And
No, I don't think so. I think the traditions of freedom run deep in our country, and even though we are concerned about how they have been eroded away, I think the traditions of freedom are still too deep, and the public will simply not stand for it.
Go ahead, please.
Yeah, Mr. Johnson, I'm totally against you, and I think that what your party's doing is completely against the tradition of Parliament, and basically just what the Parliament of this country does, eh? I mean, you say that the Liberals are breaking tradition and putting through bills like this, but yet you're breaking 700 years of tradition by doing what you're doing. So
just a minute. The tradition of the country is really not to bring in omnibus bills. That tradition really didn't, if you can call it that, didn't start until the last 15 years ago. Yeah, well, when they have been coming in, they've been pummeling in year after year, more and more of them, and it is impossible to debate open legislation anymore the way he's carrying it on. It didn't used to be that the government would do this.
Go ahead, please. Next call.
Yes?
Yes, speak up.
Yes, I totally support the Conservative stand.
Carry on.
And I am absolutely appalled by the Liberals, their message and their tactics being used. And I am certainly glad that there's a man like Eric Nielsen.
Thank you very much.
I think we'll leave it at that this morning, Benno. I'd say I don't know where the public really stands on this yet, and I don't know if you can pull it off.
Yeah, I think that the jury is still out. I think that the people are really afraid of what's happening to the country, not only on this issue, but on a number of things, the McKechnie budget, emergency planning orders, the whole national energy program.
The real scandal is, a general scandal is that the country is sliding into very tough economic times. Parliament is powerless.
That's right.
And for that, you must take some of the blame.
But it need not be that way. We'll sit today if they ask us to.
You'll sit today if they just ask
Sure,
you?
all they have to do is change the agenda.
Yeah, you'll sit today if they change the agenda and ask you.
That's right.
To something other than Energy Security Bill C-94.
Or split that bill, we'd even debate that today.
If they split the bill.
Right.
And if you give an appropriate closure to Lalonde, limitations of debate.
You recall that on the Constitution debate, Mr. Trudeau, when he had introduced it on October the 2nd, said, I want all members of the House of Commons from every part of the country to debate this. And after a week, they invoked closure on us.
My thanks to Benno Friesen. This battle will go on. Joe Clark will be on here in person, live and in living color on Friday morning. That should be worth watching, I truly believe. Next, I'm going to switch topics. We're going to meet a woman who's very unhappy for two reasons. One very serious reason. Her daughter was killed in a traffic accident. She was blameless in the accident, and she's unhappy about the system of justice which evolved from the accident. After the break. One of the most terrible things in our kind of society today, and perhaps we have to accept a fair measure of it, is that so many adolescents, so many youngsters get slaughtered on the highway. In fact, the Committee of Concerned Citizens, which has been looking at the deaths of teenagers on the highways, actually makes a horrifying prediction for British Columbia. The data for youngsters, young drivers and teenagers, show that in motor vehicle accidents in British Columbia, by the end of the century, 4,500 adolescents will have been killed in that 20-year period. Now, I got a letter the other day from Mrs. Pat Wright of Aldergrove, and in her letter she said at the opening, Dear Mr. Webster, I am writing this letter to you with the hope that you can explain one part of the legal court system to me. Well, maybe I can, Pat, and maybe I can't. I can tell you what the authorities have told me, but I want you to tell, and it's not an easy story to tell, the story of the death of your daughter, Anne.
Okay.
When did it happen?
On November the 15th, 1980. She was being driven home from babysitting, and there was a collision, and as a result, she died. She was DOA before she reached the hospital.
Now, what time? She had been out babysitting late that night.
That's right.
And the babysitting family was driving her home.
The father of the girl that she was babysitting was driving her home, yes.
It was about 3 o'clock in the morning. So she was a passenger in the car.
That's right.
What was was it a bad accident?
It was a very bad accident because when he went to turn the corner to come onto 46A Street in Langley, the car that Wesley Allen Cartwright was driving hit the side of the car that my daughter was a passenger in and pushed it 96 feet into a pole, sideways.
Sideways. So you were at home at the time?
I was home at the time.
What time did you get the news?
3 o'clock. The police knocked on the door and woke me up.
And gave you the bad news. That was really sad. Now, you also said to me, tell me what happened thereafter from your own information.
All right.
This man was he arrested on the spot?
No, he was charged at a later date.
And what was he charged with?
Criminal negligence resulting in death and impaired driving.
Now,
2 charges.
2 charges. Criminal negligence causing death and failing to blowing more than .08, I believe, was the precise charge. Now, you were interested in what was going to happen.
Definitely.
What did happen?
Well, the police...
This first of all, the accident was in November 1980, and then there was a preliminary hearing
on June the 10th, 1981.
June the 10th, 1981? You mean to say it was... Oh, yes, that wasn't much later.
That wasn't,
November, December, January.
Right.
Now, when did it finally go to court?
January the 26th, 1982.
Now, were you under the belief that this man who was driving the car was still charged with criminal negligence and the drinking offense?
That's right.
Was he, in fact, charged with that?
No, he was not. He was charged with dangerous driving or reckless driving. I'm not sure what...
Dangerous driving. And what did he get?
6 months with probation.
Yeah, he got 6 months imprisonment.
No. Well, he's 6 months in prison, but he's eligible for probation in 2 months.
That's right. It's a 6-month prison sentence, and under the parole regulations, he would do that in a minimum security place, and he did 2 months to be out, and he had some kind of mandatory license suspension because of a driving offense causing death. What is it that baffles you, Pat? I mean,
I'd like to know how come the 2 charges can be laid in the beginning, and by the time it gets in front of a judge, it's a different charge altogether. To me, the justice system is a farce. It's
In other words, there's no justice. Your daughter died
right.
by a man, the hands of the wheels of the car of a man who was charged with criminal negligence causing death and charged with a drinking offense.
That's right.
When he comes to court, not the next month or the month after, but something like 14 months later, it comes up and it's merely dangerous driving.
That's right.
Your experience is not unusual. As a matter of fact, looking over the history of how courts handle deaths and traffic accidents, that would be one of the most severe sentences. Do you realize that?
I know that.
You want to know why?
That's right. There's something missing there.
Well, I spoke to the senior Crown in New Westminster, and I spoke to the Deputy Attorney General of Victoria, Dick Vogel, and I asked, was there any plea bargaining? Because plea bargaining is a thing to which I object. I think the judge should be the one who should decide if there's any mitigation in the circumstances on a major charge. And I am told that the investigating officers were of the opinion, as well as the officers of the Crown, that after the preliminary hearing, it was proper to drop, on the basis of the evidence, the criminal negligence charge and the drinking offence charge. Now, no more detail than that do I know, but that's what happened. There was a preliminary hearing. They looked at the charges, which had obviously been laid in sincerity by the investigating officers and the Crown in the first place, and then they said, no, dangerous driving only. Do you think that's fair?
No, and I also think that the judge at that time, he was confined in certain bounds. He had to make a judgment on reckless driving, right?
Dangerous
His hands
driving.
are tied.
Nothing more he can do.
There's nothing he can do, so I can understand that, but what happened in between the two?
Well, what happened was that there was a preliminary hearing, they looked at it, and somebody on some grounds made the decision that the charge of criminal negligence causing death and the drinking driving charge wouldn't stick. Now, you know how many people get off drinking driving charges, and you know how slow the Crown is to send people to jail even for a second offence.
That's right.
On drinking driving. You feel bitter about it?
It's not bitter, I'm disillusioned about the whole system.
You thought that killing somebody on the highway to be your fault was really an important thing.
That's right. All my families had said, you know, he won't see the inside of a jail, you know, and I kept on believing, oh no, you know, Pat's naive, she's going to believe in the justice system. I got fooled.
Were you in court the day he was sentenced?
Yeah.
Didn't feel so good? Well, the reason it's good for you to come on a program and talk to me like this is that it lets a lot of people in authority know that the ordinary person like yourself, bitter and unhappy over the death of your daughter to begin with, thinks that it's a farce.
I do. I really do.
For killing someone to get, in effect, 2 months in jail.
That's right.
Must be very discouraging to the police, too.
Oh, I think their hands are tied, too. I think that somewhere in between the police and the judge, there's something...
Well, because you were coming in this morning, or rather, because he was coming in this morning, I asked you to come in. We're going to talk to Dr. Roger Tonkin now, and you stay there, about the Committee of Concerned Citizens, because the guy who drove the car that killed your daughter was in his teens.
19, yeah.
19. Dr. Roger Tonkin on the Committee of Concerned Citizens about raising the driving age, which might not have helped in this case, but might help in other cases, after the break.
This will be the mic he's using, okay?
Hearing from the...
They only charge somebody. There are no fingerprints. And you can't prove the second offence unless you bring somebody from Pouce Coupe or Edmonton or whatnot.
The other difficulty with the teenage driver situation is for teenagers, the first offense is usually the fatal one.
Yeah, it's the old drunks that get away with it alone.
Yeah, 2% of the people that are killed on a highway are problem drivers, in quotes.
30 seconds coming back.
You know, if somebody says to you in the street, it's time we raise the driving age for youngsters from 16 to 18, you'd think there's some old silly old fogey who just doesn't want to see teenagers enjoy themselves at the wheel of a car at 16. Roger Tonkin is associated with the Committee for Concerned Canadians, and he himself, of course, is a well-known doctor, pediatrics, UBC, and Children's Hospital. Is there a case, not just from an individual human point of view, but statistically, to turn back the clock from a teenage point of view and raise the driving age to 18?
Yes, it's one of the few fairly solid pieces of evidence we have, and it comes from the state of Connecticut, where they had driver education in the high schools. And because of Proposition 13 mentality, they removed driver education from a number of county schools. As a result of that, they had a perfect setup to look at the issue. And what they found was that when they removed the driver education, they reduced the number of licensed teenagers by 57%, and they reduced the number of serious crashes by 63%. So getting the kids off the road...
When they took away the driver education?
Yeah, just doing that. They thought at first it was driver education that was the explanation. But what it was simply getting the kids off the road.
Now, in other words, if they couldn't take this driver education, they couldn't get a license.
They didn't get their license. They didn't get their license, they didn't drive.
And that reduced the accidents involving young people.
By 63%.
Now, in the brief here, and it's horrifying, 45 adolescents will die in motor vehicle accidents by the year 2000 in BC?
4,500.
4,500?
Yes, that's correct. We lose somewhere in the neighborhood of 200 kids a year.
Mm-hmm. Now,
and that just is the kids that die. Last year, in 1981, we had 17 new teenagers paralyzed, paraplegics for life.
17?
17 new ones from motor vehicle accidents.
In hospitals?
In hospitals.
Or rehabilitation?
Just new cases. They're in spinal units and head injury units and rehab programs in the province now.
You mean I could probably send a camera out and take a picture and show 17 paralyzed teenagers?
Yeah, we have their names and where they live and where the accidents occurred.
They may have been drivers, they may have been...
We don't know that.
May have been passengers.
They could have been passengers.
Isn't that appalling, Pat?
No, it is.
You never think of it in terms of 17 people lying.
Nor do, you know, if you look at it just from an economic point of view, it's estimated that each of those cases costs the economy $500,000.
Yeah, for lifetime care. Oh,
Yeah.
a hell of a lot more than $500,000.
It's more than that now.
Nah, but you see, I was one of these people who didn't object publicly when the ICBC brought in the FAIR program, because the FAIR program seemed to be fair. Why should a good, sane youngster of 18 or 19 have to pay in the old days $1,000 for insurance? So now they get insurance much cheaper, which is a good incentive for them, an incentive for them to drive. Should that fair provision, lessening the insurance rates for youngsters, also be stopped?
I'm not sure about that. I think one thing we do know is that as many disincentives as can be put into the system will reduce the number of fatalities and reduce the cost. For example, driver education could be made mandatory, but something the kids have to pay for themselves. They perhaps should be paying their own insurance, not having parents pay for it. They should not be getting cut rates, in other words.
It's more democratic, but it's more damaging to the teenagers.
That's right.
Now let's talk about the licensed age. How long has it been at 16?
Oh, 20, 30 years
20,
at least.
30
Long
years.
time.
What do you want to see it put up to?
We'd like it to go to 18 for your first license, and we'd like to see the first license a probationary license for at least 1 year. And you have to keep your slate clean during that 1 year, or you don't get your permanent license at the age of 19.
Oh, at the moment, if I'm 16, I just go in, sit the test, get the license.
The parent signs the little permission slip and you're licensed for 5 years.
You'd like to put an L plate on the car?
Yes, something that tells people that this youngster is learning.
No license till 18?
No license till 18.
And any offences other than parking offences, remove the license?
Yeah.
Now, what age can I vote in BC?
19.
19. And when can I drink?
19.
What would you do about that?
Well, we'd like to raise the drinking age, but because of the voting age, it gets to be a bit of a difficult argument. But you know, it's interesting. Something in the order of 20 states in the United States lowered their drinking age to 18 or 19. More than half of those have now put their drinking age back up. And in those states where they've put it back up, they've had a 28% reduction in fatal nighttime crashes.
There's another point, too. If I'm driving now at 16, and I commit a horrendous... How old was the boy driving the car? He was 19.
Yeah, he was 19.
So therefore he appeared in adult court,
Right.
even if he only got 6 months.
That's right.
light punishment. But if I'm 16 and I commit an offense, what happens to me?
Not very much.
I am charged as to wit being a delinquent, and nothing can happen to me in fact. Is that not correct?
Well, a certain number of things can happen. For instance, you can be involved with the probation system and diverted, but in reality, not very much happens.
So therefore, at 16, I have the right to drive a car, but I don't get punished in the same way as an adult for driving a car.
You've got 2 years to learn and not have to pay the penalties that go along with the responsibility of driving a car.
I don't think you need to tell me any more about the toll, but you've got a figure here. For the 5-year adolescent group between 15 and 19, how many of the deaths are caused by the automobile?
200 out of the 300 deaths that occur each year.
That's 60%?
Yes.
And how many would die of cancer, of deaths?
Less than 10.
Oh, just a comparative fraction.
Less than 10 a year.
Now, you've seen the Attorney General. Do you get any feeling that there could be a non-partisan approach to this, to bring it in without ringing the bells, or pass a simple piece of legislation?
I don't know. I would hope it would not be a partisan issue. I would hope that the Legislative Assembly would recognize that they have a responsibility to act. It's not good enough to say it's the parents' responsibility.
And it's not good enough to fight over an issue like this. But mind you, would it be unfair to you to say that you are highly colored in your opinions because of the effects of vehicle accidents with which you have unhappily to deal with each and every day?
There's no question that my opinion is colored. My opinion is colored because I spent a good part of time reviewing the coroner's reports of these actual deaths that occurred throughout the province. Over 1,000 deaths reviewed. It sort of is a very sobering experience.
1,000 teenage deaths?
Yeah, and that's how many we've reviewed. In addition to that, I'm a parent. I'm a parent of teenagers, and I worry when my youngsters are out on the road. I worry about other parents and how they approach their kids with drinking and driving and the use of the family car.
The social pressure, though, on a family from the in affluent times, because Joe Blow's got a driver's license at 16, you can hardly deny your child a driver's license, can you?
Well, it's difficult, but I think it's an essential thing to do. But, you know, I'll give you the scenario of a parent who's not prepared to say no. But are they prepared to at least set limits? Most parents, for instance, don't know that when they sign that little chit for their youngster to get the license, that they can write into that provisions such as the license is revoked if they have a major violation or an accident, or the license is only valid until 11 o'clock at night. Parents don't know that. And the system says it's your right, your responsibility as a parent, but the system does nothing to teach us what our rights and responsibilities in this regard are as parents.
Interesting.
I didn't know that at all.
No.
I'd never heard of that before, had you?
That's a good provision, though.
No, oh, I'll come back to that in a minute. The phones are working now. They've been fixed. God willing, cross your fingers. And we'll take comments both to Pat and to Dr. Tonkin after the break.
Saying it's static.
Damn!
Is that me, or I'm just too highly charged?
No, okay? Okay?
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, all right.
Okay.
You mean you could 11 o'clock at night
Yeah.
on the license?
Yeah.
In a 7,
You
you
can-
can finish with phones, I assume.
You can write that in, and it's
they
effective
what?
until their age.
Well, learn something new with Webster each and every day. Say that again, Dr. Tonkin. If I'm a parent with a child to whom I succumb in approving a license at 16, tell me again what can be done.
If you're a parent, you have the ability to write into that initial license conditions that you feel are fair and appropriate, such as the the license is invalid with a major traffic violation or a major accident, or the license is invalid for driving after the hours of 11 at night until, say, 5 or 6 o'clock in the morning, because that's the high-risk time.
That's the bad time.
That's
the bad age
time.
is between 16 and 19.
Right.
The bad time is from 11
8 o'clock at night until 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning.
In other words,
weekends and holidays included.
If your child needed a car to go to university or whatever, you could say, you could restrict the hours, could you?
Yes, you can.
6 a.m. to 10 p.m. or 6 a.m. to
Whatever
11 p.m.
suits you.
And the motor vehicle branch will carry out the conditions of the parent.
They will honor that.
They will honor it. Have you any knowledge of it ever being monitored effectively after a parent has done this thing?
Well, that's the other problem, and one of the reasons why we've raised the issue of, let's get on with it and raise the driving age, is because there is no monitoring of it. It's available to parents, but it's something that parents themselves must monitor.
Well, okay, you give the youngster a... Do your kids want to drive after this? Your other children?
No, Donna does not want to drive. She does not want a license because of this accident. She just does not want to do it. So
I can't say I particularly blame her. But it's the parent who must monitor. I put down for my child these restrictions, and if it happens, I phone up the motor vehicle branch and say he was checked by the police at such and such a time.
The difficulty is you've got to know. You've got to know your youngster has been involved in a violation.
But I know if he's involved in a bad accident, for a start, or drinking, driving, or committing a juvenile delinquency prior to his 17th birthday. That's good, that. Calls. Go ahead, please, to Pat Wright and to Dr. Roger Tonkin, T-O-N-K-I-N. Go ahead, please.
Good morning, Jack, and Pat, and Dr. Tonkin. I spoke to Dr. Tonkin already. My name is Sally Gribble. I'm the president of Mothers Against Drunk Drivers in British Columbia.
Oh, mad, yeah.
Yeah. And I would like to talk to Pat, maybe, if she can get my phone number afterward, because I find, Pat, that it's not only in your case that these charges are never laid. It's a real, regular, common occurrence.
Do you have a personal experience?
Yes, my 21-year-old son was killed. And I've told Dr. Tonkin this before, but it wasn't between the bad hours at night. It wasn't with a teenager. And it was with a 36-year-old man. One of the things that we found from our research and monitoring the courts, Pat, is that these drunks are just mollycoddled. And I'm really glad that Dr. Tonkin has brought up his issue, because I think most parents would thank him for having that taken out of their hands, that that the driving age should get rid of.
Okay, I'll give Pat your number, Sally. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Bye. Go ahead, please.
Good morning, Jack.
Good morning.
I would like to address both issues. When I was an 18-year-old kid in Saskatchewan, I, because of family situation, didn't have a car to learn how to drive, and consequently, the only way I could get my license was with the school program. And that was in 1961. Since that time, I have never had a single point, a speeding ticket, or a single infraction. And I really attribute it to the fact that I did take this
driver education
All right.
Course. Let me ask Dr. Tonkin, do we have a driver education program at the moment?
We have a commercial one. We don't have one in the schools. The difficulty with the driver education issue, and I think that's something the caller states pretty nicely, is a lot of people don't have bad records when they've taken driver education. But there are also a lot of people who don't take driver education who have the same kinds of records. It has never been proven that driver education makes a difference.
In accidents. Go ahead, please.
Hello?
That's you, ma'am.
Yes, I would like to say I'm 100% behind Dr. Tonkin and Mrs. Wright, but I would also wonder why it is that driving tests for alcohol, at least the medical tests, are not turned over to the police. I believe there's some law that prevents them turning over the results of those tests to the police to be used against a driver.
No. You must be confused somewhere. You're talking about the tests made by the police.
After an accident, I believe, if a driver is taken to the hospital because he is seriously injured, the doctors are not permitted to turn over the results of the blood
I think
test.
Dr. Tonkin can give you that. If not, I can.
You go ahead.
The fact of the matter is that to take a blood sample from an individual without his permission is an assault on his person. What the police have been known to do in dreadful cases, if you fail to blow, you're in trouble. You can be charged. The charge might be dropped later or reduced later. Too often that happens. But the police have been known in very bad accidents to remove blood at the scene and test that particular piece of blood. But the police do not have the authority to take blood unwillingly from anybody who is involved driving the motor vehicle.
Well, Jack, we have just watched two sets of families agonize over the deaths of at least one death. One boy is a human vegetable and will be for the rest of his life. And in neither cases has there been anything done about the blood test.
Were they the drivers? Was the boy the driver?
No.
He was a victim.
In both cases, they were not the drivers.
They were hit by other cars?
Yes.
And
This is in the last 2 years.
Yeah, well, and of course there's great difficulty in getting an accurate breathalyzer too, is there not, Dr. Tonkin?
The conventional wisdom is that, in fact, our courts test the technician or the person who takes the blood alcohol or the breathalyzer test, not the impaired driver. It's the technique that gets tested.
That's a big decision to make, though, if you're going to allow the police to take involuntary samples from a human being, and it does involve a fair amount of civil liberties. That would be a big one to decide, wouldn't it? Would you be in favor of involuntary tests?
Personally, I would, yes.
You would. Good for you. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
I'm still impressed, not impressed, still appalled by this 17 paralyzed in 1 year.
1 year.
Boys and girls.
Yeah.
And that's not counting the dead ones.
No. And you know, the interesting thing is, what we had to do with this whole business was to go to a non-government organization to get the data, because government doesn't have it.
Don't bother.
They just don't collect it.
Go ahead from the NIMO. Go ahead from the NIMO.
Yes, good morning, Mr. Webster.
Morning, ma'am.
I would like to see the people, them raise the driver's license up until 19. I have a teenager of my own, and which he'll be 18 pretty soon, and he still doesn't have his license because I don't feel that they're responsible enough.
You'd like to see go to 19. Would you?
I think that's probably pushing it in our province, but what we're looking at is the combination of raising to 18 and probationary for 1 year.
So that's 18 learner's license for 1 year.
Yeah.
And any major offense out the window.
And
no
during that
license.
time, you would have limits on when you can drive. We would say to the kids, you cannot drive after midnight while you have that learner's license.
When you think of the toll of death in these 17 paralyzed youngsters, it becomes very cogent after the break. Go ahead, please. There's Pat Wright, who lost a 13-year-old daughter in November 1980.
1915.
15th November 1980. The guy was charged crim negligence causing death, drinking offense. When he finally comes up after preliminary, it's reduced to dangerous driving. He gets 6 months, which is out after 2. And Dr. Roger Tonkin, a pediatrics expert, who's horrifying us with some of his figures this morning, who's an advocate along with a committee of very sane people to raise the driving age to 18 plus a year's probationary license. Right?
Right.
Next call. Go ahead, please.
Good morning, Jack.
Morning.
I'm concerned here about the two issues that I seem to be hearing. One is drinking driving, and one is young people driving. What is the difference in the statistics between drinking drivers versus the young drivers? Dr. Tonkin seems to be dealing only with 16 to 18-year-old drivers, and I'm wondering how dangerous they are as drivers versus drinking drivers.
That's a tough one, Dr. Tonkin.
Well, it's not that tough, actually, because most of the kids that are involved in fatal accidents are not only teenagers but drinking drivers. More than half of the fatalities that occur in this province each year involve an adolescent who is impaired or close to impaired. So it's not so tough to answer. It's also important to recognize that the rates for teenagers are more than double that of the total adult population.
Accident rates, death rates, and serious injury rates. The lot.
The lot.
So the old private insurance companies or the old system prior to FAIR was at least a disincentive for youngsters to drive because they couldn't afford the fancy premiums.
It at least was a recognition of the fact that teenagers contribute a disproportionate amount of the costs of
Well,
motor
the
vehicle
insurance companies
accidents.
did it surely on the basis of statistical calculation as to the amounts of money to be paid out. But some of these 17-year-olds might not be paralyzed today if the premiums had been $1,000.
Might not have been.
Brutal thing to say, but it's true, I'm sure. Go ahead, please.
Yes, good morning, Mr. Webster. You people are talking about raising the age, you know. Myself, I really disagree with it. For one, I don't feel that all teenage drivers are to blame for these accidents. You look at it on the road and all these older people, what are you going to propose to do about the older people? Like, I've had 3 accidents in my lifetime. One I just settled for, and like, I was hit by an old man. Now, like, I feel that these older people should also have to take some sort of test or something. You know, all teenagers aren't to blame.
Okay, Dr. Tonkin can answer that point, I think.
Yeah, I think it's important to recognize that everybody drives irresponsibly from time to time. The difficulty is that teenagers seem to do it more frequently, have 4 times the number of accidents of the general population, and are at greater risk when they're involved in an accident because they don't wear seat belts, they drive too fast, and they're using alcohol.
Well, okay, I agree with you there, you're right, but I also feel like I've just completed a defensive driving course, not because I had to take it, because I wanted to take it. It gave me a bit more knowledge of things. Now, I feel like, okay, you're talking 18, okay, I'll compromise with you. I feel like maybe 17, but you should be able to get your license at 16 and be probation from 16 to 17 and then take it from there.
Goodbye, thanks for your call.
Thank you.
Go ahead, please.
Hello.
Yep.
Hi, my name's Randy McCrae, and I'm 22,
Right.
And I think the real issue is the alcohol is dealt with this, all the underage drinkers, like under 21 and stuff like that. See, most of my friends, they all drink and drive, it's like it's a big thing, Everybody thinks that, everyone can drive better when they drink. So I think the real issue has to deal with the alcohol involved with these people that are driving under 21. Some of them can't even handle 2 to 3, 4, or whatever they drink.
Well, let me ask Dr. Tonkin if he'd put the drinking age above 19. That would hardly be feasible, would it?
It's very tough to do. But one must recognize that many of these kids that are being killed are 16 and 17 years of age and drunk. In other words, the existing laws are not being enforced. That's the other side of the coin. If our liquor stores, our liquor outlets are selling alcohol to minors, which happens regularly in this province, then we should at least be enforcing the letter of the law in that regard.
But times have changed, Dr. Duncan. You well know that there's booze around every house in the province,
Right.
more or less.
Yeah.
For the teenagers to get out without having to go to a liquor store.
Yeah, but most of what they get is not from the family home. It's from conventional outlets.
That's right, you're going to have a Mickey in your pocket. Go ahead, please.
Hello.
Yes.
This is, I'd just like to comment on that underage driving.
Right.
I think it should be changed. Myself, they should have a look at the older drivers first before they have a look at the younger drivers.
Why shouldn't they look at the older drivers first, Dr. Tonkin, before they look at the younger drivers?
Because their rates are nothing like those of the adolescents.
It's quite
They're
simple.
much, much lower.
Oh,
I'm all for jailing.
30 years, and
I mean, if I was going to rewrite the criminal code, I would make jail for the first impaired offense and loss of license for life for the second impaired offense, wouldn't you?
Well, I'd keep the kids off the road because the experience is even the first offense, even the first accident is for kids, for teenagers,
That's
is
the
the
most
fatal one.
Now, but I'm going the broader picture that, I mean, for a guy to have 3 impaired or 4 impaired convictions and still have a license is a piece of nonsense,
Yeah.
isn't it?
Yes.
Look what happened to your
It's a
family.
license to kill is all it is. When they get behind the vehicle, if they're having too much to drink,
It's what, 14 months? No, it's a long while. It's what, long since Anne was killed.
she was killed November the 15th.
1980.
Yeah.
How long will it take you and your family to recover from this?
Well, we had to move from the house that we were at because I could see where the accident had taken place.
And you feel
So,
that the punishment was not sufficient for the severity of the offense and the
That's
death
right.
of your daughter.
That's right.
My thanks to you, Pat. And my thanks to you, Dr. Tonkin. I'll be back after the break. We'll skip the bells now till Friday when Joe Clark, the leader of the Conservative Party, is here. Tomorrow I've got Ray Steffich and a story about monies. That should be good. We've got to keep an eye on the monies, you know, just to know what's going on. And I'll be back tomorrow at 9 a.m. precisely.